We are back with another knitting video for Amy and you, but mainly Amy. Cue theme song.
Knitting isn't just for old ladies.
Okay, this time we're knitting a hat. It's gonna be easy, it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be knitting, so bear with me. To start, you need to pick out your yarn. I have picked acrylic because it's all I have. I'd recommend something cozier. You'll also need a darning needle and a measuring tape that measures at least 9 inches. I've picked out 6mm needles. You don't need to use this size. This is just the size I prefer. These are some samples of hats I've already made. Now I used quite a bit of a smaller needle for these ones, so they are tighter. I want to show you the difference between a bigger needle and how it will affect the hat. The size I use for these hats is 4.5mm. Now when we start, we're going to cast on 68 stitches, and we're going to first knit the ribbing, which will be knit 4, purl 4. To start, you'll need at least 5 inches of a tail, and you'll want to cast on 68 stitches. Now I know I cast on my stitches weird, they just loop on, and because of that you need to knit a row right away so that they don't unravel. So row 1, we are knitting straight across to the end. Feel free to pause here in order to catch up. I won't be able to film every step of the way because I won't have enough time to film this whole video, so don't hesitate to pause if you need to catch up. Row 2 is where we start that ribbing at the base of the hat. We're going to knit the first 4 stitches, and then we're going to purl 4 stitches and complete this all the way to the end. One thing I will point out, when you're done knitting and you're about to turn into a purl, you want to move the yarn from the back to the front of the needle. This will ensure that the yarn doesn't get tangled when you go to start purling. And then make sure you don't forget to move that yarn back to the back of the needle to start knitting again. You'll need to alternate the yarn back and forth like that every time you switch from a knit to a purl, so you'll be doing it a lot. For beginners, I recommend writing down where you're at as you go. So write down a tally for knitting and a tally for purling so you know where you've left off and what stitch. On row 3, we're going to start with a purl instead of a knit. So we're going to purl 4 stitches, then knit 4, then purl 4. And it's going to alternate back and forth each row. We're going to switch from purling from the beginning and then knitting from the beginning. This is why it's super important to keep track of what stitch you're on so that you don't get confused. If you ever lose track of where you are, look at this closely. So if you see the purl facing towards you, that's when you're supposed to knit. If you see a knit stitch coming towards you right here, that's when you're supposed to purl. Another indication of where you are if you get lost is in the stitches. So see how these ones are flat here and these ones are ribbed up? So the flat ones are for knitting. The ribbed up is for purling. So we're supposed to go purl, knit, purl. So we are starting this next row with a knit stitch, and we're going to do the same thing. Knit 4, purl 4, knit 4, purl 4. And we're going to continue to do this until the ribbing is at least 1 inch to 2 inches long. You can do it as long as you want to. Really, this is the part that's going to fold over the brim of the hat. So I find if you make it too big, the hat just becomes shorter. As you switch from a knit to a purl, you'll see a bit of a gap, and the stitches kind of stretch out in the middle a little bit, but when you go to continue knitting, that tightens up. The only time you see that is if you pull your knitting apart. Once it scrunches back up the way it's sitting on your head, you won't notice that. This is a guideline to help you keep track of where you're at while you're doing the ribbing. Feel free to rewind it as many times as you need to and press pause or rewrite it out. So we're just going to pause until you catch up. We need it 2 inches long, and once you've completed the ribbing, we are going to knit straight across the row. When you're done knitting straight across, the next row is going to be a straight across purl. So we're going to purl every single stitch all the way to the end. Now repeat alternating the knit 68, purl 68 until your hat is about 9 inches long from start to finish. Now that your hat is 9 inches long, we're going to begin to decrease. So when you're ready to decrease, we're still going to be knitting a row and then purling a row and alternating. So you want to start with the knitting row. knit 2 together across the entire row. So you're just going to knit 2 stitches together and repeat that until there's no more stitches left. Once you've decreased a row, you'll notice the shape begins to cone inwards. That's exactly what you want to see. Now for the next row is purl. We're just going to purl straight across the entire row, one at a time until the end. You begin to start to really see the shape of the hat forming. And once you're finished purling, we're going to do the exact same thing we did before, where we knit 2 together all the way across the row. On the next row, we are going to purl straight across the row again. This will be the last time we purl before we cast off. This is the last row we're going to do before we cast off. We are going to knit 2 together across the rest of the row, just like we did before. You'll want to have a long tail and then attach the darning needle to the end and lace it through the stitches along the needle. Take the darning needle out the other side, and at this point you can take the knitting needle out. And then you're just going to pull tight. That should tighten the very tip of the hat. Now flip the hat around to whatever side you want to be the inside. Ensure those stitches are still pulled tight, and then you're going to stick the needle through to close the hat up. Now before you pull tight all the way, we're going to lace the needle back through right here to create a quilt stitch. This is just going to reinforce the stitch as it goes down. Make sure it's a little bit stronger and it doesn't come undone. Now continue this quilt stitch all the way down the seam until you're at the very end. When you're finished, it should look something like this. In order to make sure the hat doesn't unravel, you're going to want to put the needle through a couple of stitches at the very bottom. I go back and forth 3 times just to really make sure it doesn't unravel. And we're going to do it again with the second tail. Now that you're finished, you can turn your hat inside out, so it's right side out now. And you can flip the brim up. This is how I usually have it. And you're done, unless you would like to make a pom-pom. Then I can show you how to do that. To start your pom-pom, you want to wrap your yarn around your hand and make sure that tail stays out of the yarn. You want to use that at the end. And just keep wrapping and wrapping and wrapping. The more yarn you use, the bigger the pom-pom. Once you have the desired amount of yarn, we're going to slide it off your fingers as carefully as possible. And then as tightly as possible, you're going to wind the yarn around the middle. Now do it as tightly as you can without breaking the yarn itself. And then you're going to use that tail to tie it tight. Now try your very best to get as tight as possible, because the looser the pom-pom, it's just going to fall apart. Now that yarn is bound, you're going to go very carefully and tuck the scissors into the very edges and cut. Try your very best not to cut the string that's holding it all together, because I've done that before and it's a total pain. You're going to do that on both sides. Now fluff up the pom-pom, and you're going to see long bits all over the place, so you're just going to want to get your scissors and just clean up. Make it all the same length, all the way around. Play around with it until it feels right. You can cut as much or as little as you want. But just keep in mind, once you have the pom-pom attached to the hat, you won't be able to machine wash the hat, because this pom-pom is quite delicate and it will fall apart easily. They're easy to make. If you need to make another one, you can, but it'll just make a mess of your dryer and your washer. Now get your darning needle, attach to some yarn, and tie a knot in the end. Gently tuck the needle through the pom-pom and pull tight until that knot is at the very end. Now you're just going to stick this through the hole of the hat and pull tight through. Now kind of play around with where you want the pom-pom to sit on top of the hat. You're going to tuck the needle back in through the top of the hat, through the pom-pom. And you're going to just sew it until it feels secure enough. Try and make sure that that needle gets all the way through to where that center of the pom-pom is sitting. When you're happy with how secure it is, turn the hat inside out and tuck the needle in through a couple of times. I usually do 3, like I said, just to make sure it doesn't unravel. No knots needed, and then you can just cut the yarn and you should be done. Can I help you?